board is looking for consent on the bylaw to increase the requisition limit from $40,000.
Mark, I have a question for you in regards to the comment you made regarding the services and the terms of reference, because I remember there was a conversation at the regional table where it came up that one of the individuals has changed positions. We have a new position individual. Have we gotten any clarity on that yet? That was the main concern, I think, issued by a lot of directors.
We have, yeah, we've actually got a bit more direction. BC Transit's asked their transit planner to do the work that we've asked in terms of determining the impacts of a reduction in service. So they're beginning that work. In fact, in my inbox today, I noticed there's a MOU request for us to sign for BC Hydro or BC Transit to commit to doing that analytical work on our behalf. So at least things are moving.
They're starting, but we don't know what it looks like yet.
We don't know what it looks like.
Oh, so any idea of timelines and when we will be seeing something?
No, I don't at this point.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Tripp, Councillor Butler.
Sir?
Share a mic.
Yeah.
It works on both. Thank you, Mayor Conley. Yeah, if I can just ask Mark, you mentioned that there need to be 2/3 assent on this from the participants. I'm just wondering if you can tell us who has consented or if anyone has, and then what the bottom line would be for us. I see this from 40 to 50,000. Will we just be asked to contribute 10,000, or are we going to be asked to contribute more to make up for part of that $23,000 shortfall as well?
First question, so far we've received consent letters from the two electoral areas, electoral area D and electoral area E, still awaiting word from the city of Greenwood and the city of Grand Forks. In terms of the budget, the proposed budget for 2018, I can give you a sense of the numbers. This is draft budget numbers, and it's based on last year's levels of additional contribution from Area D and Grand Forks. In 2017, Grand Forks paid a requisition of $18,752, and then an additional operating contribution of $7,671 for a total of $26,423.
That was last year.
Last year.
Okay, 26,423.
Yes.
Okay.
And in 2018, for the draft budget at this point, and this doesn't include actual numbers, so it's very much draft. We're looking at a contribution requisition of $23,495, an additional operating contribution of $13,087 for a total of $36,582.
Thank you.
But also not yet knowing what kind of service they're going to be getting.
That's right. That's based on status quo in terms of levels of service. 5 days a week, 8:30 to 5:30 in the Grand Forks area.
Okay, but so we have no real knowledge of what could happen if, let's say, they cut services. Well, obviously this amount will reduce possibly, but should their services be somehow necessary to escalate and be higher?
It shouldn't be higher. We have had requests for higher levels of service, actually recently from a member of the public asking for 2 runs from Greenwood to Grand Forks, but considering the cost crunch, I'm assuming that the participants aren't going to want to increase the levels of service. As far as reductions go, BC Transit has said that April 1st is when they renew the annual operating agreement with the contractor, so Interior Health, and that would be the point at which they would need clear direction from the regional district in terms of whether we want to reduce service levels. So at this point, one of the things that regional district staff would like to do is engage in a dialogue with Interior Health Authority as the operator of the service, because I think they have the best sense in terms of the impact on the service and the impact on the community of reducing the days of service from 5 to 3. So I think that would be a key discussion to have, because they know sort of the impact on the day-to-day users of that.
And any changes also, if I recall correctly, there's quite a huge timeline when you change services for them to be implemented.
That's right. She had indicated 40 to it's 40 to 60 weeks for them to change the service plan at BC Transit.
You're talking almost a year.
Typical, yeah. By the time they get, because they've got to change the riders' guides, they've got to change their programming. There's a number of changes that they have.
So which means we could be embarking on a proposed budget amendment or increased costs, not realizing exactly where we're going to be at, let's say almost in a year from now.
Yeah, without clear direction or information from BC Transit, it'll be difficult. It may be difficult to determine what the impact is of decreasing the levels of service for 2018. But as we move forward to 2019, we'll certainly have that better information.
Councilor Tripp, Councilor Miller, I think you.
Yeah. Did you have a follow-up to your
Well, I had another question.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So the comment that I want to make is that we know that there are people in our community for sure who are very dissatisfied with the level of service as it stands right now. You know, they don't believe that, especially the what you call that curb to curb. We have a number of disabled people in our community who are really struggling, and we've heard very clearly from them that they would like to see improved services. A lot of those people, especially on the weekend where there's nothing, and they are basically just homebound and have no way to get out. So when they're doing this survey to find out what services, the decrease of services, what kind of impacts that would have on the community, are those people going to be able to provide some input so that their concerns and their desires are taken into account, because they're the ones that are using it?
Yeah, I think it would be important to have some form of community engagement prior to implementing any changes to levels of service.
Yeah.
Director Russell.
Just use the other mic.
Oh, there
Just
you go.
very, very briefly, also to clarify, if we don't pass, if the city of Grand Forks doesn't, like, we don't approve this bylaw revision, then we have to reduce service, right? This is make sure everybody's on the same page. Right now, we cannot afford the service, the current service levels, given the budgets we have.
So we're kind of in the rock and the middle.
Well, I just want to make sure there's two pieces of this conversation, and so that it's clear that for council, that one part of it is the decision to approve this bylaw amendment, and then the other part of the conversation is what should this service look like in the future, and does that include either a reduction or an expansion in service? And so, you know, like those timelines that we're hearing quoted today from our previous, I don't know what the title is for Daniel Pizarro, but from his perspective, you know, when we were talking about those expansions of service, it was more like 18 to 24 months that we would look at if we went through a potential expansion to the service. So the timelines are very long for changes to that service. But right now, the immediate order of the day is to make sure that we have enough money to actually deliver the existing service. And we have gone to BC Transit with that request to say, what would it look? How would we save enough money in that service? You know, what kind of reduction options are available that would mean that we could afford that service, given something more closely aligned to what our current budgets are. So that's what this conversation is. Those conversations about service reduction are our request. That's the City of Grand Forks, Rural Grand Forks, and other participants to say, what would this look like if we were trying to save some of the reduce the increase, basically.
But is the assuredness there for at least the status quo to stay in effect if we agree to these increases? Because it represents, quickly looking at it, almost a $10,000 increase.
There's two different pieces to that too. There's the so we are right now the regional district is trying to amend that bylaw, right? Again, reminding you the regional district being in this case the City of Grand Forks as well as Rural Grand Forks and other participants, in order to allow us to tax up to that $50,000 mark instead of the $40,000, right? The allocation of how we contribute respectively, those partners, is enshrined in the the bylaw itself, right? So the relative apportionment of those costs. We recognize that still will not get us where we need to be in terms of the amount of money that we need to support the service, the given current service levels. And so there's an obligation then to get more money into that service that does not come from taxation directly. And so that's where those other numbers, right, through both gas tax as well as operational funds, that's making up that difference, right? That's also part of the conversation with Greenwood and Area E, is understanding when we get that feedback from BC Transit to be able to say, okay, how much use does that Greenwood run actually see? And that'll then be part of that conversation when we're all sitting around the table together to say, okay, well then if the City of Grand Forks and Royal Grand Forks were the main participants in that service, how much should we expect those participants in the service to contribute for that bump up, because it's distinct from the traditional, the typical balance of taxation right now.
So if I understand this correctly, to be quite blunt, we're being asked to agree to an increase, but we have no assuredness of actually what we're going to get at the end at this point in time.
Right now, in order to continue the service that we currently have, we need more money. And that it has not come as a surprise. This has been on the 5-year financial plan for the last at least I think 3 years, that we know this is on the horizon.
Well, that's my concern, because it's been increased all the time. So now if we're looking at an 18 to 24-month timeline, even if we support this, we're not sure, but at the end of the 24 months, there's going to be another substantial increase, because they're going to say we can't make it work.
It's not going to get any cheaper.
Yeah, well, that's exactly my point.
Yeah. But the question being also is that right now we have a service, and in order to continue that service, we need more funds.
That's understood. So there's no way of putting a cap on it, so to speak.
So just to comment on that, it's difficult to say that we want to pay for something that we're not even happy with the service as it stands right now, and yet we're being asked for even more money. I mean, I think that's probably what we're all dealing with. You're saying it's two separate issues, but in fact, one issue affects the other.
Councilor Bennett. And then Councilor Lawson. Oh, sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, I pulled up the rider's guide here, and the fares are incredibly cheap. $1.50 for a ticket within Grand Forks and $1.75 to Greenwood. So I mean, that's not on par at all with what you see in the Lower Mainland. Although people riding this bus obviously are either disabled or elderly or very low income. So we're not dealing with people that can probably afford to pay more. So this is really, it's almost a free service being offered by the community to help those that are less fortunate, which is similar to what we're seeing with the issue with BAS. It's all a similar issue, right? I mean, how much can the community afford to pay and afford to do to help? And we want to, but how much? And I'm just wondering if there's any way of doing a compromise of raising the rates and the city chipping in a bit more, like even if we raise them by 50 cents, how much would that, and I'm wondering if there's people that have free passes to this bus because of their disabilities, if certain riders don't have to pay. And also, third question, IHA, has it gone out to tender for any other people to do the service? I don't know if Silver Kettle, I mean, they have a bus that they're able to do it, or anybody else in town that would like to get a bus and do the service for cheaper. Has it been put out to tender at all?
It's a good idea.
The service contract is between BC Transit and the operator, so we're not involved in that process. So I'm not aware of what their procedures are in terms of seeking other competitive bids on contracts. So I unfortunately can't answer that one for you. We can review the fares. That's something that certainly can be done, and BC Transit has expressed a willingness to do some analysis in terms of what the impact would be on those fare changes. Currently, the fares represent, as you note, a relatively minor cost of providing the service. We got revenues in 2017 of $9,700 and 2016 of $9,400. So it's a little over 10% of the operating cost of the service. In terms of are there people who don't have to pay based on their mobility status or something like that? I'm not aware of that. Certainly there's no provision in our ticketing guide for that, and so I think everybody is paying their fair share. There is a pass system, a monthly pass system for the Greenwood run. but I think everyone else is paying the regular trip-by-trip fare.
Quick question, Mark, based on what you just said, is there any data to substantiate if this service is actually warranted? Like as far as volume being used? Is there any data out there that can, in other words, I can see why the high cost, because nobody's hardly using it. Like the old statement is, who uses a bus anymore? Who uses a bus anymore?
We do get regular data from BC Transit on ridership, and actually the door-to-door service, the subscription door-to-door service increased. I think it was about 11% last year, so it's significantly increased. The curb service decreased marginally, but apparently there is increasing demand for
So even keel are a little better. Okay, thank you. Councilor Thompson. Nick Councilor.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. Am I correct in assuming that not only there's the requisition that you're requesting to taxation, but you're also requesting the municipality to contribute to the operations? So there are two components, like, and is that right? So you're asking for, let's say, off the top of my head, 15,000 for the service, and then another 10,000 for the operations. So
13.
well, whatever.
To cover the additional costs that we're not allowed to requisition directly for the service. In the past, it's been $40,000. The actual operating cost of that service has been considerably higher. And similarly, if we increase it through the bylaw amendment up to $50,000 with a budget of $82,991 proposed for 2018, and that's largely almost entirely based on the BC Transit contract that we have with them, it won't cover those costs. So the only other alternative for us to do that would be to increase the requisition limit in the bylaw above 50%. That requires us to go through a referendum or alternative approval process with the community, which we could do, and that's a decision for the Boundary Community Development Committee, that the partners in the service to determine in the long run, do we want to increase it beyond that? This is a stopgap step, increasing it to $50,000, because we can do that with the consent of the participants without having to go to the community and the referendum process.
Director Ross.
And
Oh,
my,
sorry.
Just, if I may, because I'm speaking to your question, just to reiterate, because I think the semantics are important. This is not the regional district coming and asking the city of Grand Forks for something. This is us as participants in the service, being the city of Grand Forks and rural Grand Forks, trying to figure out how to fix our problem.
Yeah.
So there's no request for something here. This is just simply, we know we don't have enough money in this, so we have the question is either we find more money or we cut the service.
yeah, no, and I understand that. That's the way I say the regional district, because it comes through.
Yeah.
You know, the other question I have is how, and I probably should know this, but I don't, or can't remember. Well, how is the share determined? Is it done by population, assessment, percentage?
So it's done by assessment. So the entire assessment base of the city of Grand Forks, electoral area D, and city of Greenwood are used for assessment. And then there's a local service area that's a portion of electoral area E in the Greenwood area that's been assessed as well as part of the service.
Councilor Ross and Councilor Hamilton.
All right, thank you. Councillor Thompson and Councillor Tripp did ask my questions, but maybe I didn't catch the answer. So I'm hearing ridership is somewhat up. What would so what, you have to throw money at this to fix it. How much money are we being asked for? That's what I'm not clear on exactly. I see some percentages here, and I have another question as well.
In total for 2018, under the draft budget, it's $36,582 compared to 2017 when it was $26,423.
That's
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 12,000.
strictly the
Yeah.
city of
So
Grand
it's
Forks.
going up
That's
by
Grand Forks.
10,000. It's going up by 10,000.
Yeah.
12,000.
No,
10.
10.
10,000. Last year was 7,000
26
for
to
operational,
36.
this year it's 13 for
26 to
operational.
36.
Correct.
10,000.
So the operational has gone up 6,000, whereas the rest of it has only gone up 4. Am I right? Or a little over a change.
So like, my concern is, recently we came very close to losing Greyhound bus service in rural BC. And several of us wrote letters to Greyhound and got to stop that service. And I know throughout the boundaries, Green, rural Kootenay region, that these services are really important. Not just to people who are shut in, low income, but for young families who are also commuting, moms and kids going to doctor's going grocery shopping and whatnot. And it is a concern that we further cut these transit services. So, $10,000 seems like a lot of money, but whether you use a bus or not, every jurisdiction funds their public transportation, and there seems to be more of a movement throughout British Columbia to fund public transportation. And it's just, and then is there anything we can do to better promote it so that more people are availing themselves of that service?
Yeah, in terms of promotion, that's one of the issues that would probably be good to engage IHA in the discussion on this, because they may find that it's described as is in terms of the usage of the service. We don't know that at this point, whether there is capacity for additional usage. As I said, I'm just looking up the numbers here. Ridership increased 11% over the last year, with a 10% increase in passenger trips. Yeah, so there's certainly an increasing demand for the service.
Okay.
Which in turn, though, if there's even a bigger increase in demand, so also the increase in cost goes hand in hand, because it's not being funded by individuals regarding fares. Okay, Councillor Hammond.
Yeah, I think it was last spring that we had a transit meeting at Gospel Chapel with MLA Larson and Sunshine Valley Community Services and several of those councillors were attending. We discussed the concerns with transit in our area. What are the shortfalls and what's good, what's bad? And a number of suggestions and recommendations were put forward, and I know our MLA was taking that forward. And I'm just wondering, has there been any work, has there been any communication back? Do we know, is there any dialogue between transit and our local MLA in the province that is assisting? Because I know she has been working on this actively, and then after that, she got involved with the Greyhound bus issue as well. So transit was high on her priorities, and I'm just wondering if she's been able to make any inroads with the province.
I'm not aware of any of those discussions at that level, so I don't know the answer to that.
Likewise, I just don't know.
Quick question.
Councillor Butler.
Sorry, what was the total cost of providing the service for the year? Was that the 50,000?
Total for the entire service?
Yeah.
83,000 here. I can just pull it up. The budgeted amount for 2018 is 82,991 in terms of total expenditures.
That includes everything operational.
Yes.
Yeah,
So almost 83.
just seeing what our portion is.
As compared to last year.
Last year,
Yeah,
actually it was more last year, 86,333.
that's right.
Yeah. Last year, as I mentioned earlier, we utilized some reserve monies to offset the costs of the service. We don't have those reserve monies available to us anymore, so that's why the contribution is higher than it would have been last year, even though the expenditures for operating the service were higher in 2017.
So Grand Forks is paying about half the cost of the service.
Based on the
Pretty close.
Yeah.
Pretty close, yeah, 36.5.
So if I may, if you look at the agenda for Boundary Community Development Committee, you'll see the drafts of a bunch of our budgets. So right now, since we're just getting into budgeting, so all of our regional district committees, whether they're like the BCDC or whether they're and all of them right now are the initial drafts are being presented. So if you want to look at those numbers, and so for example, with that transit budget, you would see the first draft, and it would include it has all the backup pages that would show you how much the various contributions are, as well as what the expectation is going forward. So
Yeah.
so
I'm just wondering, is Grand Forks using half of the service, or is it a lot of people from Greenwood coming back and forth? Like, is Greenwood actually using more of the service than Grand Forks?
I think it is very unlikely that that's the case, but we don't have a clear answer. They give us some of the ridership statistics, but they don't. That particular piece doesn't seem very clearly articulated to us, and that's exactly the request that we went to them to say is give us some more clarity on how much that Greenwood Grand Forks run actually sees. The part of the rationale that it's not going to be as large of a contributor to the total cost is just based on the timing breakdown, right? Like that happens only on Fridays, I think, correct?
A single run, a single bus.
Yeah, as opposed to the remainder of the service, which is 5 days a week.
What about rural Grand Forks, really?
Well, saying
Like,
so
are they
those,
using more of the service than us in town? I'm trying to pass the buck, right?
yeah.
You don't need.
So I guess
That's
so.
going to be part of the clarification we're going to get. Is that what we talked earlier?
I think we will get some clarification. The question of how rich that data will be is an open question. But again, so stepping back, given that there is a bylaw in place, then the relative contribution. So this is unusual in terms of this request. The first order of business is to approve the amendment of the bylaw. That's not unusual for us through the regional district. The second piece of that puzzle, in terms of the other contributions, is a more unusual. We don't normally do that, right? Because normally we have the requisition to cover and whatever else is in that budget to cover that. So that piece is more unusual, and we've tried to keep that in line. The conversation has been to try to keep that in line with our relative contributions through the bylaw, through taxation, even though that's not directly, it's not being paid for through that same requisition allowance.
But the second piece is something we would deal with through our own budgeting process.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so again, I think there's lots of conversation that would be productive to have about what this service looks like. I mean, we've had it at the Boundary Community Development Committee meetings. We've talked about, one scenario is to say, okay, we want to get rid of that service entirely and find some alternative to fill that gap in terms of local transit, right? And we can have all those conversations, but right now we also just need to get that bylaw amendment passed. And so,
Okay, but here's a question now. We need 2/3 participation. So what happens to these numbers? Are they out the window? Let's say hypothetically example, Greenwood opts out. That changes everything.
no, so again, the way that we budget, we being you and Rural Grand Forks and the rest of the regional district participants, is so that bylaw has committed all of us to providing for this service. So there's not an option to say, oh, I as Rural Grand Forks, I'm going to step back out of this service unless we initiate a service and go through that process to either dissolve or give the opportunity to remove ourselves from that service. So it's even if, for example, Greenwood didn't want to go ahead with that, if the other three participants all agreed that it would make sense, then that would still go forward. They would then potentially say, okay, look, they would give notice, sort of thing, say we have an intent to withdraw, but that process takes a fair bit of time as well. So it's not, given how the regional district budgets, again, I'm sure you've heard this maybe too many times, but if we establish a budget for a certain service, that money can only be used for that service. We cannot move it to a different service. And the relative contributions are enshrined in the bylaw that creates the service. And so we do not have the flexibility to say, okay, let's say the city of Grand Forks thinks that transit is really important and they want to expand that. That's a very challenging thing to do without amending the service bylaw itself.
That's right.
Do we currently have bus service back and forth between Christina Lake though? It's only to Greenwood.
They up to them.
See, like, we have this ongoing discussion regarding what we need in transit, and I know it's a cost comes down to dollars. But I mean, in the wintertime, it would make sense to put a run out to Phoenix Field, who desperately wants to have the patrons up there. And in the wintertime, shift it so that they're taking people to the lake, to the beach, right? You know, for recreation purposes, we don't have any transportation, and for kids, teenagers trying to get around, it's a bit difficult, and I think that service like that would be utilized. What we're talking about, just not even being able to maintain our existing level unless we do major increases.
That's right. That's a challenge. And so, and that was part of the initial conversation that prompted some of the conversations with BC Transit some time ago was, for example, saying, okay, well, is there an opportunity for more fare box revenue if we expand the service, for example, to take a run that goes via Phoenix? If we've already got a bus going to Greenwood, you know, in the winter months, is that a viable scenario? And that's where we got that feedback from BC Transit saying, which might be different now, because we have some different personnel in those positions, but where they were saying, yeah, you could entertain that, but just so you're clear, you know, it takes us 6 months to get this done and then 6 months to get this done. And so you'd be looking at essentially a year and a half before, in the most optimistic scenario sort of thing, before you'd see an expansion to service like that, because they have their processes to go through. So,
Implementation would be a struggle to say the least. Councilor,
So I don't know a lot about transit in the Lower Mainland and other areas. Does the provincial government kick in any money for transit services, or is it always covered by the municipality?
Yeah, absolutely. BC Transit is involved in virtually all of the transit systems province-wide, and for our service, we're a local government paying 38% of that. BC Transit is paying the rest of the operational cost of that service.
So the 82,000 that it's costing to run the service, BC Transit is paying more over and above that?
Absolutely,
Oh,
yes.
so IHA is getting paid a lot more than 82,000 to run the service.
Likely so, yes. And there are the bus leasing costs and other associated costs with the operation of the service, administration costs within BC Transit, those sorts of things. But yes, that 82,991 that's budgeted for 2018 just represents 38% of the cost of operating the service.
Wow.
You'd never run a service for $82,000.
Oh, I know, that's what
All right. Dorsey.
Your Worship, I think that there's some time sensitivity for a decision on this from requested by the regional district, and so I think that if council wishes, they could refer this as a late item to tonight's meeting to decide whether they want to give their consent or otherwise, and then that really gives something for the regional district to vote.
That would have been my recommendation too, because you obviously think you're presenting your case.
I'm going to refer this to tonight's meeting.
Mr. Ross, okay. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? So carried.
other issues?
Any other?
Given that it looks like it's 1:45, I guess the other piece that I was hoping to speak to a little bit is economic development, and since we're talking about transit service, the same. So with our economic development service, we're going through a formal service review of that service, and that essentially means we're going to spend the next little while really assessing, are we getting the value that we would like to see out of that economic development service, and exploring what those alternatives look like, and going down that path. And so we don't have to get into it today because it's been a long meeting, and it'll be an ongoing process. Part of what we had been positioning our economic development service to deliver or include was a regional advisory table, essentially. And I think that I've talked with you before about that, and the notion that we could have a group of actual stakeholders in the community that are invested in economic development be advising us as local government in terms of our economic development decisions. And so those two things are both happening kind of in parallel right now with our economic development service, where we're set to establish those regional advisory tables essentially, or table. At the same time as over the next few months, we'll be looking at different scenarios for how we can deliver economic development service and how to maximize the value that we're getting out of that service as we go forward. And at our last meeting, we did hear a pretty, I don't know if those of you that know Terry Van Horn, she's the, what is her title, Mark?
Executive Director of the Lower Columbia Initiative Corporation.
Thank you.
Greater Trail.
Yeah. And so she gave a very impassioned presentation about their model and how it works on that side, which has some certainly appeal to myself personally, but it's kind of, it relies on an advisory, an advisory table that is then composed of a bunch of subcommittees that are on specific focal areas to make recommendations. And so anyway, so that's maybe a conversation that it's not that time sensitive. We don't have to have it today, but next time maybe we can dig into that piece a little more.
Kate?
Great, thank you, Your Worship, through you to the Rolly Russell. Kate for the Gazette. This Economic Development Service, that's the BCDC, that's a service that they run?
So again, we budget by services, and so those service establishment bylaws dictate that. So it's not actually, it is what was the BEDC, but that's a committee. So it's the Boundary Economic Development Service, okay, which is one of the services that is captured under the umbrella of our Boundary Community Development Committee. So we have a committee that represents, for example, transit service as well as economic development service.
Okay.
So it's the Boundary Economic Development Service that I'm speaking about now.
Okay, so where I'm specifically interested in the intersection then is, what does that have to do with our Chamber of Commerce that serves the boundary? Are they part of that service, or?
No, it's a distinct entity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? I guess we're gonna recess for lunch.
No,
Although we might recess for lunch.
Yeah, you probably know where it is now. Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you.
All right, moving on to 5B. Are the monthly highlight reports on our management. The recommendation is that the committee will receive the monthly highlight reports from department managers. Mr. Hammond? Take discussion, Councilor Butler.
sorry, couple questions. Jeez, Chauncey.
Go.
Under electrical, there's a bit of stuff here I don't understand, and I'm just wondering if it could be put in plain terms, what's happening with the reconductor project along Riverside, how that project is going, if it's on schedule, and I just wanted to comment, the snow removal's been great. I know you commented about that earlier, and you guys have had a lot to keep up with, especially with all the ice, so thank you for that. Under planning, there were 3 resulting inquiries about the proposed bylaw changes. I was just wondering if that should be commented on. That's it.
Mr. Reed.
Very good, Mr. Mayor. The voltage conversion down Riverside Drive is going very well. So the contractors strung all the primary line and the neutral, so they'll just be tying that in this week, and they should be done fairly soon. We're happy with that project.
And the planning inquiry.
Thank you to the mayor. So yeah, I believe at this point, Peter Matheson's video has been seen over 450,000 times on YouTube, and Grand Forks Council has mentioned quite favorably. And we've been getting lots of inquiries passed either through Pete or directly to us about when the changes are happening. Some of these are very, people actually are serious. I know of at least one land sale already because of it, even though we've advised, they haven't been passed yet, but a small lot residential property is in the process of even being purchased with the intention of putting a very small cottage on it. So the the inquiries are coming in and they're resulting in, at this point, not a lot more work for the department, but it's new kinds of questions are coming in. And the final piece is that there's an inquiry on the way, I guess, just kind of forming about a larger development involving tiny homes. So more details coming.
Councillor Thompson, Councillor Tripp.
And I just wanted to echo Councillor Butler's comments on the snow removal. You guys have just done a fantastic job. But a question to the fire chief. The fire was set outside the entrance of the commercial building. Was that arson?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Is it arson? Well, fires don't light by themselves. But no one saw the person's face. We suspect who it is. We would be fairly confident in saying who it is. But because we didn't have anyone actually see them, that was as far as we could go with that. Fortunately, it was cardboard, and fortunately, it was lit on some concrete at Gospel Chapel in the corner, just outside there. Yes, and it ended up going up, and that's the fortunate part. We never got called to that fire. What we got called was the smell of smoke inside the building, and because it was by an exit door that didn't have a good weather seal, and so air flows into buildings, and that's what happened, and so that's where the smoke was. We did an extensive search inside the building, had no idea that was outside the building until towards the end of the search, because we couldn't find anything, and then I think it was one of our crew said, well, there's something outside here, right? And then we found a neighbor that had said, yeah, we saw someone riding away on bicycle, right? But I said, did you see their face? No. Anyways. Katie?
Yes, thank you, Your
Oh,
Worship.
sorry, Councillor Tripp first.
Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Conrad. Yeah, just wondering, I just was wondering about a property that's on 11th Street. And Graham, I don't know if you're aware of this property, but it has the main home and then a small trailer that has a number on it that is 10 different than the next one over. It looks to be hooked up to utilities, and it is it's skirted in. So to me, I'm wondering if this is actually qualifying as a tiny home. Is it coming in? Has it been registered? Is it already in place? I'm just wondering what the status of that particular property is. It's on 11th Street on the west side.
Here, maybe I can.
North of Central?
North of Central. So on 11th Street on the west side of the street, north of Central.
That trailer was a temporary occupancy for a fellow who's building a house. It is now just disconnected, to the best of my knowledge,
Okay.
and it is skirted in, yes, and he will be moving it in the spring.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. And then the other question that I had, I just was wondering how things are going with the wastewater treatment plant, how things are going in that.
That would be you, Mr. Reed.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, the project's moving forward. The balancing tank is complete. Signed off on that piece. We're waiting for the actual building drawings and the electrical and the pipe work to be completed this next year. And we did order the centrifuge, so that was getting some of the equipment ahead of time because it has a long lead to it. So it's moving along well.
Good, thank you.
Kate.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Kate for the Gazette. Not to belabor the discussion about Whispers of Hope, but I'm looking here in the reports and I see that under Human Resources, there's the hiring of an electrical coordinator stated. And it was stated this morning that the city doesn't have the capacity to assess or do any of that stuff with the electrical. So I'm wondering what that role is. and the function within the city.
Can't answer that, it's operational.
To whoever.
Your worship, our previous electrical coordinator is no longer with us, and this is just the reinstatement of that coordinator position.
Oh, so that was a role that existed before?
Yes,
And what does that role entail typically?
they coordinate the electrical.
So that would be electrical projects or?
Your worship, of course, most of the projects that the city does is through the lineman and the electrical utility itself.
Mr. Reed probably gives a bit more insight on that one. I believe it was Mr. Zelinski that was previously that way.
Correct, yes. Through you, Mr. Mayor, the electrical coordinator deals with the high voltage. So the electricians don't have that same training, or it's a different ticket.
Okay,
So it's a power line technician that we have, or PLT. So they just deal with the high voltage and secondary work.
Okay, interesting, thank you.
Councilor Thompson.
Just through you, linemen are not qualified electricians. It's a totally different course, so they don't have the same ticket. That's a different, you have,
Category.
yeah, totally different category. So they could not go in and start to rewire a building because they don't have those qualifications.
Yeah, well, just the position title
Yeah.
is a little bit vague, so I just wondered about the relationship between, I know the city does have the utility.
No, I know, but I just wanted to clarify that just because we refer to them as the electricians, that doesn't mean that they can go in and start doing wiring them.
The coordinator would be a form of a foreman, right, in the electrical department, in other words.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor to receive? Anyone opposed? So carried. No reports, no late items. Item 12, question period from the public. Do we have any? Hearing none. Oh, we do.
More of an observation, just for your information, that little device there that I was playing with is also working with the little device on there. You've been live streaming all morning, except for a small amount of time when I had to change the batteries in that thing. And just so you know, in this first 3 hours of the meeting, 212 times people came to watch it. At one time, there was up to 50 people watching simultaneously. It's a very, very contentious subject. And one little thing, the electrical thing, just reminded me of something. Did you know that Ontario Hydro spent $9 million designing their bills? And they want to spend 6 more. That would be $15 million for their billing. It's mostly the back end stuff. I'm sure we don't spend anywhere near that much, do we? Anyways, you're live.
Thought you were going to tell me you found that tape.
Oh, I did, but I haven't been able to listen to it.
You must trust us, Les. No comment.
We'll deal with it in camera.
Yeah.
No. All those, motion to adjourn. Councilor Thompson, all those in favor? The meeting is adjourned.
Are you, that's gonna stay and record the capital projects?
Yeah, do I get to go out and get some breakfast?
You know what, surprisingly, not too many will
Sorry.
view that.
Yeah. Sorry, not an official question, but just, we're still having a budget workshop, is that,
Yeah.
like, right now, or half hour?
Well, I think we're going to eat first, but
It'll take about 20 minutes.
maybe a working lunch.
1 o'clock, yeah.
Can I leave and come back?
Yeah, 1:30, say?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you asked if we leave, will we come back? Probably not.
So like 1:30?
Yeah, around 1:30 would be great.
And then if you left it on and you did that, change the battery.
I'm possibly gonna do it.